oil leaks, sudden acceleration, faulty electronics, faulty oxygen sensors are just some of the typical failures you're going to experience in modern day Toyotas. So today we're going to talk some of the key failure areas in typical Toyotas, why they're failing, and what's in the future for reliability and Toyota. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. So one of the big issues that Toyota had back in 1997 to about 2005, they had these issues with oil sludge. That's right, even with a reasonable amount of maintenance and oil servicing, a lot of these engines were actually very, very prone to oil sludge buildup, of course, oil consumption, and you find a lot of the Camrys, those are the worst generations of the Toyota Camrys to be buying. So they caused a lot of oil consumption, ring problems, ring lands, sludge, and just an overall massive deterioration. It wasn't until about 2007 that Toyota figured some of that out, changed some of the policies around doing oil services, and there was actually a class action lawsuit because we're talking about 5 million vehicles or more were impacted in those eras. So clearly a little bit of a miss by Toyota. Now, a big issue that Toyota also had for many years and impacted many models, and it was actually called forced acceleration or sudden acceleration, where what you had was a problem with the actual floor mat, and the design would get and lodge itself underneath the throttle pedal. The driver could not get or sustain control of the vehicle, and the vehicle would just zoom away. And it wasn't until you had to take some drastic measure, like possibly shut the ignition off, throw it in neutral, turn it off, or do something more extreme or drastic, that you were able to actually get the car under control, because the car wanted to fight you, and even by hitting the brakes, the car wanted to take off, and resulted in a number of injuries, certainly a number of crashes and collisions, and it definitely got widespread attention. NHTSA, National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, got on board as well and forced the hand of Toyota to make sure that they fixed up some of these issues with the floor mats here. As we're looking, you know, right here, some of the floor mats were tended to kind of bind up with the actual throttle pedal, as you can see right here. Some of that actually would just work its way under there and force that gas pedal like that. Very, very scary moment in time. And while it seems like a simple and easy fix, it certainly isn't simple and easy when you're the receiving end of a sudden acceleration. Another issue that Toyota hasn't been exempt from is faulty water pumps. If you've got a condition where you're driving along and you're seeing the over-temp light come on your dashboard, or you're looking at the temperature gauges if that car comes equipped, you might find yourself the gauge starting to rise. Then you find yourself lifting the hood, taking a look underneath, and you see coolant pouring all over, possibly see steam rising from under the hood, and just a whole barrage of, obviously overheating conditions. A lot of times it has to do with either leaking or definitely failing water pumps. The water pumps are mechanical. They're usually on the one end of the engine, of course. The V6, 3.5 liter V6 engines were actually somewhat notorious for that, as were some of the V8s, and even the 4-cylinder engines had some problems with water pumps that would fail. They would leak externally, or they would just stop pumping the coolant appropriately, and resulting in a massive overtemp condition. The last thing you want to do is continue driving your car if the temperature is increasing and getting out of control, because with a lot of these modern engines with all aluminum, there's a likeliness of warpage, and then of course either remachining and a major engine job just to make that right. So if you suspect a bad water pump, leaks on the ground, overtemp conditions, stop your vehicle right away. I'd suggest get it towed in and get a mechanic to check it out as soon as possible. There's also been a lot of problems with fuel pumps. A lot of late model Toyotas as well as Lexus vehicles had problems with this Denso fuel pump. Either the fuel pump wouldn't pump enough or possibly over pump. And the worst part is, it isn't just the fact that the vehicle can die roadside, it's the fact that it could be at a very inopportune time. Like for example, you're going for a pass or you're making a left-hand turn in a busy intersection, when if and when that vehicle would die because of the lacking in operation of the fuel pump could mean a catastrophic failure and a serious, serious concern for health and safety. Now, another problem that a lot of Toyotas seem to sustain, and it's not just Toyota unique, a lot of manufacturers have the same problem, it's sensors. The more complex the vehicle these days, the more sensors. Bigger engines need more of these. And what we're talking about are oxygen sensors. Oxygen sensors are usually placed in the exhaust system, usually right before the catalytic converter and as well after the catalytic converter, making sure so you're monitoring the health of the cats, you're also monitoring the airflow mixture coming out of the engine, and it allows the computers in the automobile here to actually make adjustments, and it just knows more precisely of what it needs to do for fuel and air mixture. There's lots of sensors in modern day vehicles. We're dealing with a 4-cylinder Toyota here. This is a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, and if you're talking about the 3.5 liter V6 Toyota, it sits the same way. So in the V6, because it sits sideways, it's transversely mounted. In other words, it goes this way because it's a transmission that is driving the front wheels. But in this case, 4-cylinder V6 has an oxygen sensor on the back and on the front because that's on either side of the exhaust of the V. Okay, this one here is a 4-cylinder, 2.5 liter. There is an oxygen sensor way down there. But I've got a trick. This is the easiest DIYer because if you go ahead and grab that OBD2 code reader, which I'm going to link in the description below, you definitely want to get a hold of one of those because if you have a check engine light, it's a must-have for any home do-it-yourselfer. And on top of that, you need this special socket right here. As you can see, it has a slot in it. This is actually an oxygen O2 sensor socket. And the reason it's got this cutout is because you need to run and route the wires off the sensor. So you unplug the sensor and then you slide this over the oxygen sensor. And then of course you can turn it out. So you need to get one of these, also link in the description. And this is one of the easiest DIY tasks that anybody can do. Just attach it to your beautiful little 3/8" ratchet. And away you go, Bob's your uncle. And you can change that if you're spitting out a code on your OBD2 code reader. You know it's an O2 sensor. This is an easy afternoon job. Save yourself hundreds of dollars instead of going to the dealer. Another issue that is commonly failing in a lot of modern day Toyotas. These vehicles aren't built for rough and rugged. Unless you're buying the hardcore Tacomas and Tundras, you might find yourself with a lot of the mainstream cars wearing out some of the suspension parts. Sway bars, struts, control arms, ball joints, all of the underpinnings, the parts that control the geometry of the suspension. And because it's front wheel drive, you've got torque steer. You have a lot of going on the front end with the front wheels steering. Of course, they're also driving the wheels, taking up a lot of the bumps and the noise that you're feeling on the road. What you're typically going to find is premature failure, and a lot of these parts are built relatively lightweight. So you can actually anticipate some early failure on a lot of late model Toyota vehicles. A lot of things to look for. You can take it for a test drive. If you're actually shopping for a used one, make sure the car tracks straight and true. Make sure when you hit the brakes, it brakes straight. Make sure there's no clunking and noises. Make sure when you're turning full lock, either way, you're not getting grinding or crunching or clicking noises. There's a lot of easy ways to check on a test drive how good or bad the suspension are, but there are some weaknesses in some of the Toyota suspension parts, something to be aware of. They're not overly expensive, but you definitely want to take care of it. Another problem that sort of made the radar was the variable valve timing lines, particularly on the 3.5 liter V6, was problematic. And there's pressurized lines that feed that process. And unfortunately, some of the VVTi lines were subject to a recall or certainly subject to some bulletins by Toyota because they were rupturing. And if they ruptured, you'd wind up with the whole gamut of oil on the ground in short order. If that happened, you drove it for too terribly much longer, you could evacuate the engine of oil and result in a catastrophic failure. Have you heard the latest as well? Fresh off the press. So Toyota RAV4s, anywhere from about 4 years of age, 5 years of age, all the way back to about 10 years of age. There's a whole host of them. There's, as a matter of fact, almost 2 million vehicles recalled because of this. Yes, the battery issue. Now, it's not the battery per se, it's the small top batteries. There's some fasteners that hold that battery down. But what's happening is a lot of people put a smaller battery in there, and then the brackets that hold it down allow that battery to move around in the chassis. And then when you take hard corners, that battery slops around, and then the positive right here is actually makes contact potentially with the restraining metal, and then it causes a short and a potential fire. This hit the radar just this week, fresh off the press. Another little issue and an oversight by Toyota, more of a nickel and dime repair, and of course Toyota will take care of it on their dime. Nonetheless, another little issue that Toyota has seen in the last little while. Now, the new transition away from reliability might be a new thing for Toyota. Now, I truly have faith, and I think most of you do as well. We all know that Toyota takes pride in how they build their cars. If they have problems, they stop it in real time, and they fix it when things get rough. But the fact remains is Toyota has traditionally enjoyed reliability because they've kept things simple. They've kept the same engines, naturally aspirated, larger displacements like 3.5 liter V6s or 2.5 liter 4-cylinders, maybe 5.7 liter V8s that you're finding in the Tundras. Those engines have been bulletproof, but things have changed now. They've tried to get with the times. They have to improve fuel economy, engine output, performance. They have to be competitive with the rest of the industry. And in doing so, they're starting to get rid of some of the durability. Some of the naturally aspirated engines now, like this little workhorse here, this is a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, arguably one of most reliable engines you'll find in a Toyota barnyard. But sadly, these engines are going away. Now they're going to be replaced with turbo 4-cylinder engines. Twin turbo V6 are replacing the V8s of all magnitude. Turbocharged 4-cylinders are replacing a lot of the older V6s. So what does that mean? We already know that some of the turbochargers have had issues. The wastegates and the turbos are all encompassing. So the wastegates have been problematic on some earlier generations already in this new redesign. And when you change that, you have to change the turbo. Access is also quite often very difficult, as it's usually strapped to the back end of the engine somewhere, usually associated with the exhaust system, makes it difficult to get at, and that is going to be a problem. Time will tell on reliability, but this new transition to this new engine design for Toyota will likely cause some challenges. And with all of that said, checked out right there, that's 2024's best SUVs coming up. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.